1, 2, 3,
3, 4.
4. Who are we missing? We're missing
Walt.
Walt.
Quorum's 3.
Yep. Oh, maybe Walt didn't have any power last night.
Well, yeah, internet problems, power problems, all kinds of stuff. So who knows? He may have internet problems.
Yeah, we had no problems. Well, it's 8:31, so let's see if we are. Our attorney is on here. Brian, are you on?
This is Brian. I'm here.
Okay, all right. We'll now start the meeting with the spiel from our lawyer.
Okay, this is Brian. Maureen, have you started the recording?
This is Maureen. Yes, I have.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody. This is Brian Yates. Welcome to the Woodlands Mud #1 Board of Directors meeting for Tuesday, February the 16th, 2021. I hope everybody's doing well with everything going on with the weather and power outages and whatnot. Appreciate your ability to participate in today's remote meeting for the district. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through the meeting procedure, then we'll perform a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone the meeting's being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we will continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely today so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with our board of directors, Bob Wildlick.
Here.
Walt Wachowski. Absent. Ken Dorland.
Here.
Jeff Long.
Here.
Hartley McIntosh.
Here.
Okay, that completes the roll call for our board. We'll move on to Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson.
Present.
Mike Mooney.
Present.
Barney Bourgeois.
Present.
Jeannie Scott.
Present.
Shelley Lawson Kennedy.
Present.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water on the line? Okay, we'll move on to San Jacinto River Authority. Ron Kelly.
Present.
Chris Meeks.
Present.
Matt Corley.
Present.
Anyone else from the River Authority in the meeting? All right, we'll move on to Mud One consultants. Do we have any Mud One consultants in the meeting? Okay, we'll now move on to members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well. Okay, Maureen, are there any other numbers that are appearing that have not identified themselves for the record?
There are none.
Okay, this is Brian. That will complete the roll call. I'll hand it over to Bob to begin the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, since there's no public here, we can move on to item number 3. Update on Falling Star Court. Mike, anything new?
This is Mike. Nothing's changed since last month. Still the same status.
I don't understand. These people are so anxious to get this work done, but it's taken forever to get the paperwork.
Yeah, this is Brian. Bob, what's going on is one of those homeowners had a change in their lien holder they provided to us. After we provided the documents for execution, they said they had changed their loan provider. So we've had to reorder ownership and lien holder report to get the title work for that new loan because the lien holder has to sign the consent for that easement, and we have to have the recording information for that new loan. So since that new information wasn't disclosed until we provided the paperwork, we've had to reboot the title work process, and we're waiting on the title company to provide us new title. That's where we stand.
We're making haste ever so slowly. Okay, item number 4. Do we have any requests for relief? Mike or Jeannie?
This is Jeannie, and I don't have any.
And this is Mike. I have none either.
Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I would like to move item 9, the San Jacinto River Authority report out of the consent agenda. Otherwise, if there are no objections,
I'd like to request that item 10 also go to the regular agenda.
okay, Ken Dolan requests, okay. All right. Anything further on that? If not, I will make the motion that we approve the consent agenda.
This is Jeff, I'll second.
Any further comments? Brian, you want to call the vote?
This is Brian. If there are no other questions on the motion on the consent agenda items, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt? Ken?
Aye.
Jeff?
Yes.
Hartley?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, we'll now move on to item 9. So Chris, you have the duty for number 9?
Yes, sir. So just briefly, surface water in January was about 60%. Groundwater was about 40%. We're still trending in the 65-35% blend ratio for the annual average we're going for. As you'll see towards the winter, towards the summer, surface water will start going down and groundwater will start coming up based off the higher demands. No violations on the wastewater side, and everything else stayed in compliance for the month. Did you have any specific questions you wanted me to answer?
No, I'm certainly glad to hear we're moving to the 65-35. I think that's good news, and I hope we can continue to do so.
This is Ron Kelly. Just a clarification. That's 65% groundwater,
Right.
and 35% surface water.
Correct.
Okay, I thought it was mentioned 60-40, but it's 55-45.
Well, currently right now, surface water is at 60%, groundwater is at 40%. But throughout the year, you'll see the fluctuation where surface water will go higher, groundwater will go lower, but we're still aiming for the annual average of 65% groundwater, 35% surface water.
Okay, any further questions or comments on the SJRA report? Okay, item 10.
Hey, Bob, this is Walt Leszewski.
Oh, hi, Walt. Greetings.
I'm sorry, we got power finally back on, but we have no heat in the house, so that's why I'm late. So I apologize.
Well, that was interesting. At Georgia's Coffee Club yesterday, we had our Congressman Brady was our featured speaker, and he had to talk from his car because he had no power, and he was freezing in his car using his iPhone. Even the rich and powerful can lose power. So glad you're back on, Walt. So, okay, Brian, is number 10 for you to discuss, or Jim, is that your bailiwick?
This is Brian. That's on there for me. It's an annual item, and Ken, that's probably a good idea to pull that off since you're a new director and haven't seen this before. So this is an annual administrative item for the board. That's why we had put it on the consent agenda, but it probably bears going through the explanation for you as a new board member. So we're required by law to adopt a wage rate scale that sets out the wages paid for construction workers for any project that's let by the district or that the district concurs in the award of. If it's a developer project, which this district doesn't have any of those at this point. Over time, the districts, MUDs, used to go out and perform their own wage rate surveys. They would survey Montgomery County, they would survey the city of Conroe, and each county and city would have their own wage rate scale, and the MUDs would go and survey those entities and come up with their own scales. Very labor intensive to come up with that. Over time, the counties and the cities, in many cases, would move to adopt the U.S. Department of Labor's wage rate scale. That's where we've, starting, probably 7 to 10 years ago, started recommending that boards go ahead and adopt the U.S. Department of Labor's wage rate scales for Montgomery County. And that's what we have done for many years now. The Department of Labor updates their wage rate scales usually every year, not like clockwork, but usually every year. They did update their scales slightly this year. The main change was to update the underlying minimum wage for any wage class, not specifically for any trade like electrician or pipe fitter or whatnot, from $10.80 up to $10.95. It's not a material change for any projects the district would do. And what I've had a number of engineers tell me over the last few years is, with the labor market so tight in the Houston metro area, that contractors have to pay their workers more than what these minimum wages are. So it doesn't have any material impact on the district at this point. But that being what it may, we are required to have updated wage rate scales. And since the Department of Labor's updated their scale, we do recommend that the board go ahead and adopt those 2021 scales for Montgomery County. Happy to answer any questions.
I guess I inferred from this that we had some project coming up that was going to involve Davis-Bacon. And I had a lot of questions if that's true. For one thing, Davis-Bacon requires one hell of a lot of paperwork. And it has to be kept up on a weekly basis. In some cases where things are a little fluid, we would have to have someone attest every week at penalty of perjury that all the data is correct. That is, everybody's being paid the correct wage in that whatever project we're talking about. And the paperwork can be very expensive. I mean, if our staff is fully occupied now, fully loaded, we would need more people to really handle a project like that, or at least a person. And I wasn't sure that this appeared to be kind of an automatic, but I wasn't sure that we aren't entering into a period where this is going to become very much more expensive, because a lot of the wage rates in the current Davis-Bacon wage rate schedule are below $15. And if the Democrats get their way and get a $15 national minimum wage, we're going to have to every week go out and change all of our wage rates. And we're going to have to make sure the contractor changes his payroll. Going to have to make sure that the workers are getting their new pay scale. And this is going to happen every time a change to the wage schedule happens. And if you're in an environment where the minimum wage for the whole country is changing, that could be really a state of flux for several months, and it could cost us an arm and a leg.
This is Brian Ken. That's a very good point about the possibility of a new federal minimum wage, and we'll be monitoring that as that issue makes its way through the stimulus bill. But that's a very good point, and we are going to have to monitor the federal minimum wage issue, because that would, of course, impact all these scales. Mechanically, how it works now is we include this with bid documentation if the district has a bid package or is engaging a contractor, and that contractor is required as part of entering into the contract. That's an attachment to the construction contract that they have to attest that they are going to pay their trades the minimum wages set forth in those scales.
What happens if we take no action on this resolution?
Well, I would
This is
suggest.
Brian. I mean, you'll.
As a Director McIntosh, that's just ridiculous. We're going to take action. I call the question.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the resolution adopting the prevailing wage rate scale? Hartley, do you move to do so?
I so move by unanimous consent, and that doesn't need a second.
So Brian, do you want to poll?
This is Brian. If there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt?
Walt, aye.
Brian, this is Director McIntosh. On this, if you've been watching the impeachment proceedings, if there's no objection, the motion is carried. If there's no objection, the motion is carried.
Objection.
There doesn't have to be a roll call.
Ken
Objection.
Dorland objects.
Okay, this is Brian. So in the roll call, we had Bob, aye, Walt, aye, Ken,
Nay.
Jeff,
Yes.
Hartley,
Yes.
okay, motion carried. 4 in favor, 1 against. Thank you.
Okay, DFC development process. Ron, it sounds like that's your bailiwick. Ron, are you on?
Yes, sorry, I had to find my mute button. Yes, GMA 14 meeting was fairly lively in January. The Lone Star board meeting on February the 9th was even livelier. And so I don't really want to waste your time by going into details other than there's questions about Lone Star and subsidence and to be addressed later. Bottom line is they did not vote on how to direct their general manager on how to vote in February at the GMA 14 meeting regarding the DFCs, particularly all 3 that contain a subsidence statement. So I'm not sure what's going to happen on the 24th of February, but we'll have to wait and see.
So Ron, are you going to prepare a submittal or a presentation for the meeting on the 24th?
I don't know if there is anything too comments to make. I mean, it's really now in the hands of the GCD general managers to discuss and vote. There's no new information to bring up, and so I think the meeting on the 24th is just to watch and see what happens. We will at this point in time.
Well, it's my understanding, Ron, that the GMA 14 could actually vote in February to approve the DFC from a Lone Star. They don't have to. I think they have until May, but they could as early as February. Am I correct on that?
You are absolutely correct, sir. Yes, sir.
I got an email. I think it's from Laura Norton. that the Lone Star meeting was recorded, and there were some interesting comments that were about 2 hours or so into the meeting. If the directors, our directors haven't received this, I'm going to send the link or a copy of Laura's email to Shelley and have her distribute it to everybody. So if you want to look, just look at what's going on. As Ron said, it was pretty interesting. I haven't looked at it myself, and Ron, can you summarize in a sentence or two what went on 2 hours or so into the Lone Star meeting?
Sure. I'll try to summarize it as best I can. At the GMA, it goes back to the GMA 14 meeting. That was the previous week. And in that meeting, Samantha Ryder stated that one of the things that my board has asked me to do is provide GMA 14 an update on where Lone Star stands. Then their consultant, James Beach, made the comments that these are Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District comments. The board and Samantha wanted me to present that. And one of them is, at this time, we can't support the use of DFC statements for subsidence in Montgomery County. So I asked at our review committee meeting where Samantha was participated, help me understand when the Lone Star board discussed in an open meeting their stance on subsidence as part of the DFC statement. And that apparently upset the general manager of Lone Star and the Lone Star board, and they spent 2.5 hours at their board meeting explaining how they have considered subsidence in all their evaluations, and they had video clips of presentations and everything, and then basically said that I was spreading propaganda and that they were going to pass a resolution in the next board meeting and to basically condemn me and ask for an apology from me, Jace, and the board for spreading such propaganda. But they never answered the question. When their consultant said at a GMA 14 meeting, the Lone Star board will not accept the DFC statement that has subsidence in it. And I simply asked, when was that discussed in public? And I get it thrown back at me that, I shouldn't be mean to people. So, so they like that. That's basically how the meeting went. Can I answer any other questions? Or does that answer the question?
Yes. So it sounds to me like there's a price on your head. So do you
Yes,
need to go into witness protection?
Now, what's interesting about it is that last Friday, I believe it was, Ms. Ryder reached out to Jace, and I understand to others, and they want to conduct stakeholder meetings now with their stakeholders. A couple of members of their board, a couple of members of our board, and talk about the issues. And we find it interesting that they want to do that now. So I don't know who all they reached out to set up those meetings. I understand it's more than just SGRA, it's other stakeholders.
And Ron, FYI, I haven't had a chance to visit with you in detail, but I did get an email from Samantha essentially asking the same thing, if a couple of Woodlands Water Agency board members would be willing to sit down with a couple of their board members.
And I know the same request went to Southern Montgomery County Mud, and my understanding is that Southern Montgomery County, the initial response was, we'll be happy to talk with you in an open public forum. But that was a response that meeting's been being worked on, I guess, a couple of weeks. But so I don't know where that stands.
Who's working on it, Ron?
Well, I think from Southern Montgomery County MUDs, my understanding was that their position was, y'all come to a Southern Montgomery County MUD board meeting, and we'd be happy to talk to y'all about anything you want to talk about in an open meeting for the record. So it wasn't like a big forum for everybody. It was, they were talking specifically about their situation. I don't know where that stands with them. So I know that Jace will be reaching out to Samantha to what are they trying to accomplish now at such a late date, and what is the format for such a meeting, and what's the form and what's the purpose.
Well, I'm motivated to get something in to GMA 14 on the 24th. So I may talk to some of my friends in the other MUDs, particularly Neil Gaynor and maybe Laura Norton, to come up with a statement that a number of us are willing to sign and submit on the 24th. Would anybody on our board like to be a signature to that? I'll see what I can stir up with Neil, Laura, and maybe John, yours. Any comments?
Director McIntosh, I have no objection to signing that once I get to review it.
Ken Norland, same here.
Same with me, this is Jeff.
Same with Walt.
Okay, I will see what I can stir up, because it just irritates me no end to see the stubbornness of the Lone Star board and how they're just want to go full speed ahead and damn the torpedoes. So okay, I will work on that. So okay, let's move on to item number 12, the sixth and final grand accounting. Now, Brian, is that something you want to chat about?
This is Brian. I believe Chris Meeks was covering that.
Yes, sir. This is Chris Meeks. I do have a brief presentation to run through. It's in your packet. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what we wanted to do, I'm going to move on to slide 2 or the next page. What we want to do is just give a brief recap of the sixth and final accounting, kind of explain what it was, what it is, where we're going, so on and so forth. The interim accountings were done since 1983 as a way to provide funding for future expansions of water and wastewater systems. And basically, as the woodlands developed and got larger, and then did some redevelopment over the years, this was the funding mechanism, if you will, to fund those large capacity items, expansions at wastewater plants, extensions of water lines, so on and so forth. So what we have done in every interim accounting is to evaluate the existing and projected capacity needs of each of the MUDs in the woodland. We look at water and wastewater system capacity, all the lines, the pipes, the valves, the plants, so on and so forth. Then we would basically standardize the development. So we would change everything to an equivalent of a single family home, which is where we get the SFDUE from, which is a single family dwelling unit equivalent. And then once we get the cost and we get the SFDUE, divide those into each other, water, wastewater, we ended up with a projected SFDUE cost. What the MUDs would do is, if a MUD needed 1,000 more SFDUEs in water, whatever that cost was per SFDUE, that MUD would contribute that much to the fund to help purchase whatever is needed to expand. And this took place since 1983. The last sixth and final accounting was in 2017. And I'll come and talk about why we're bringing this up here in just a minute. Moving to the next page, considerations and impacts reviewed. We look at regulatory requirements, projected development, and customer demands. So it's the water system, it's the wastewater system, it's market demand. What does the developer think they're going to do over the next 5 years? What does the developer think they're going to do up till 10 years? With the sixth and final accounting, that we actually asked the developer to take its ultimate development, which they said at that time was 2027. Moving to the next page, purpose of sixth and final accounting and path forward. And if you have any questions at any point, please stop me.
Yeah, I do have a question. The SF DOEs were determined in 1983. How were they determined, and is there any basis for changing how that's defined?
Yes and no. So the SFGUEs were developed in 1983 for a 5-year period from 1983 to roughly 1988. And the second interim accounting, which was right around 1988, the SFGUEs were redeveloped. So every time we had an interim accounting, the SFGUEs were redeveloped and the costs were redeveloped.
Okay.
The last set of SFGUEs were redeveloped in 2017. And it's a great segue to this slide that shows purpose of sixth and final accounting and path forward. Because after the sixth and final accounting, we had discussed with the MUDs and the contracts, so on and so forth, that each of the MUDs would individually address any additional capacity needs that they have beyond what they have already purchased. And so Woodlands Water is monitoring the growth, redevelopment, the SFGUE allocation throughout the woodlands for each of the MUDs. And then by January 1st of every year, we receive, the River Authority receives basically a report showing each of the MUDs, what their purchase capacity was, what their current capacity is, and anything additional that's expected to be developed beyond the SFGUEs as purchased. So what happens is if there is a development in a MUD that is beyond the SFGUEs that's needed, that MUD and solely that MUD is responsible for the capacity funds. Whereas before, if there was enough development and we were in the interim accounting, the MUDs collectively would share the cost for the infrastructure needs. So when we move to the next page that says item for consideration, just a few things is that capacity is built and funded only for the growth identified in sixth and final accounting. Anything that happens in addition to the sixth and final accounting is likely not included in the sixth and final accounting, and there's no capacity because all available capacity has been sold to the Woodlands MUDs already. We have not built additional capacity and in reserve that we can sell at this point. Then
Chris,
any additional, yes, sir.
I understand MUD 46 has put their foot down and they're not going to fund additional capacity, that they're putting that back on the developers. Is that MUD 46 or 47 that's taken that position?
I think it's 47.
47.
I believe that's 47. That may be something better for Brian or Jim to answer related to policy.
Yeah,
This is Brian. I don't recall a decision by either of those MUDs regarding capacity discussion. I think there's been a discussion as to when MUD 47 would consider funding some new infrastructure for development at 1488 and Kirkendall Road in that area, but that isn't a capacity related discussion. There's capacity available already in the sixth and final for that project.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No worries. And so it just brings us back to the thing I was saying earlier. Additional capacity requests may trigger capital projects funded solely by the MUD requiring the capacity. Now, if you're thinking that it makes sense, and it does, if you have 1,000 SFGUEs coming in, you have a large multifamily redevelopment, and it's a lot of capacity needs, yeah, it could be a lot of tax revenue, water revenue, so on and so forth. The infrastructure that may be needed could be in the millions. Because if I can't expand wastewater plant 1 by 50,000 gallons a day, I may have to take it up to 250,000 gallons a day more. And so it could be millions of dollars just for those SFDUEs. And so some of the things that we're seeing is the redevelopment, the multifamily development, and of course, vertical development in the woodlands. And so the last part of this, fixed and final accounting projected demands in SFDUEs per MUD. This table is from the sixth and final accounting. These are the SFDUEs purchased by each of the MUDs, then the related water and wastewater demands tied to that. So MUD 1 is currently in the need of, I believe it's 3 water SFDUEs and 4 wastewater SFDUEs. And so that's the reason for the presentation is to reacquaint all the MUDs and say, basically, this is what you've bought, this is what may trigger additional, and this is where you're sitting today. So 3 water SFDUEs is like 1,200 gallons a day. 4 wastewater SFDUEs is less than 1,000 gallons a day. So what we're trying to look at and evaluate over the next month or so is there a way to get that capacity without having to have a large scale increase? But the concern is not just MUD 1 that needs the capacity. I believe there's 5 or 6 MUDs that are looking at capacity as well. So 3 or 4 SFDUEs for one time only to occur may not be an issue, but if I have each of the MUDs once a year wanting 3 or 4 SFDUEs, then over time it becomes a big snowball effect and a bigger issue. So it's a quick rundown, but we will be coming back at some point next month or the month after regarding the evaluation, what we found, and then any cost that MUD 1 needs to pay for that capacity. Can I answer any questions?
Director McIntosh, we went through all this in 2017, and that included all of the contents we'd signed for capacity and all the bond issues that we'd issued to buy that capacity. And I don't recall since 2017 signing any content to increase our capacity. Now, please enlighten me.
You are correct. This is Chris Meeks. You are correct. There has been no additional request from MUD 1 to increase capacity. And so when we come back with the evaluation, if what it comes down to is the MUD will have to request and sign for that requested capacity. If they do not purchase that additional capacity and sign for that additional capacity, these additional SFDUEs could not be built.
Right. Unless we approve the building that requires more capacity, then we don't have to even address this. And by the way, that comes down to the point that the bond issue was paid back to the developer at 100%, and the law says you don't have to pay 100%. Okay, so there are a whole lot of emaciations to that as well, by the way. But I think we don't want to go forward saying that we have to buy capacity until we're approached and told why we have to buy capacity. That's all.
I have a question. How is an SFDUE defined? How do they come up with that equivalent number?
There is a very large document that goes into a lot of technical data. It basically looks at the water demand across the woodlands, wastewater demand across the woodlands. Each little subsection has differences of how they equate to a single family dwelling unit equivalent, but a single family is defined as 2,000 square foot. And so yes, sir.
Director McIntosh, would you give Bob a copy of that document that we gave to all the MUDs in 2017? He'd have to have the one for MUD 40 and the one for MUD 1, and it explains in a detailed spreadsheet how they came up with the capacities, and it was quite a boat drill at that time. I appreciate what everybody did on it, and I don't think we ought to reinvent the wheel on this.
No, I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. If I received it, I've long since forgotten it. But I'd be interested in seeing that, Chris.
Sure thing. I'll send an electronic copy to Jim,
would
and he
be-
can have it for anybody who requested.
Yeah, that would be fine.
This is Jeff. I'd request it. I think all of this brings up a lot of issues and adjustments to the equivalent unit factors, and see how accurate they are, because just a little tweak here and a little tweak there all of a sudden frees up a whole lot of units, or does the opposite if you make certain assumptions about what that equivalent unit is. So I think it's a little bit technical, and sometimes can be a little tricky. So I'd like to see that in. I want to.
This is Director McIntosh. If we want a special meeting, I was present at the creation of this whole system, and I think I have a pretty good handle on it. And I think that our $6,000 accounting was supposed to close the book, and all that's happened is the developer wants more capacity going forward, and that's why they're presenting this at this time, basically trying to make everyone alert that if you got more capacity required, somebody's going to have to pay for it, because their plant has sold all their capacity at this time. Now, if we want a special meeting so they can explain to new people the entire grand accounting and how all the things were developed, I think that's possible, but I don't think we need to have it at this meeting.
And just to add one little bit of information as well, I'll definitely send those packets to Jim so he can have that. The sixth and final accounting also carried forward the data from the fifth interim accounting, and it basically says that the water SFUE is 430 gallons per day, wastewater is 217 gallons per day. And you'll find that in the report, and we can get that to you. So if you buy one SFUE, you're buying 217 gallons of water, or 217 gallons of wastewater, 430 gallons of water per day. Any other questions?
No, that was educational. I've learned a lot here. Okay, any more questions on item 13 or item 12? So we'll move on to item 13, centralized wastewater treatment. Chris, is that yours or Ron?
Yes, sir. This is Chris Meeks again. So I do have a presentation. It's on the Google Drive. It's about 15 to 20 minutes with no questions. I don't mind questions, but let me tell you what the summary is, and y'all can let me know if you want the presentation. Over the next, depending on which method you go, if you use the current plan that we have in place, which is replace the asset before it fails, but use the service life, basically, of that asset, over the next 20 years to 40 years, you're going to have be faced with replacing wastewater plant 1 and wastewater plant 2 in its entirety. And so what the presentation shows is, like, wastewater plant 1 would replace over a 20-year period, 4 phases, 5 years apiece. As soon as plant 1 is done, then you switch over and we look at wastewater plant 2. The replacement of these assets is based off of their service life and expected condition at that time, or at this time. And so wastewater plant 1 is, the bones of it is 45, 46 years old. Over the next 20 years, all the different phases that we did during the interim accountings will be reaching their service life and will need to be replaced. As soon as plant 1 is replaced, plant 2 will need to be replaced. That cost, over with inflation and everything else, over a 40-year period, is somewhere in the ballpark of $200 to $400 million based off the very high level information. Yes, sir.
I've lost the feed.
So when,
Hello?
can you hear me? Can
Uh,
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Now I can. My
Okay.
internet connection is unstable.
Okay. And so as we were talking to the audit committee about long-term financing, we brought forth this option of consolidation of the wastewater facilities, which is basically demolish wastewater plant 1, either expand or build a brand new wastewater plant at wastewater plant 2 to handle all the flow. That option is somewhere in the ballpark of 200 to 400 million, depending on transferring of the flow. And so what the River Authority has brought up and asked for is a feasibility study for consolidation. And what the feasibility study would look at is what is the cost to renew plant 1 and plant 2 over what time period? What's the cost for consolidation and a few different options? And then what is the cost to transfer the flow? That study is about 12 months long, and it's somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million based off of the options that are asked for by the MUDs. And so I do have a presentation I can run through, but I wanted to give you that high-level summary in case you did not want the presentation.
This is Jeff. I got several questions. Having read through the documents you sent, I'm not sure I want the presentation. It seems like you covered most of the high points. The question I have there is the range at the end of it seems to be pretty high, between 100 million and 500 million on your documents. But the question I have relates to the bill. It says the average wastewater bill right now in 21 is $26. Now, I'm seeing a chart here that starts out in 2025 and shows these numbers on the blue line all the way up to $60 and then tapering down, which is never going to happen. But and then I have the orange line, which is really to expand wastewater 2 and then renewal, which goes up to as high as $46. Is that on top of the 26? And I wasn't quite clear on your chart.
Yes, sir. What you're looking at on that chart, the potential impact to residential wastewater bills, that is in addition to whatever the average bill. So for a frame of reference, we gave today's average bill of $26. So if you're looking at, let's just say 2030 and the orange line, if the average bill is still $26, you would add roughly, $20 to it, about $19 to it for that option.
Yeah, so all of a sudden 26 becomes 46, right?
Correct.
Okay, and on the blue line, it would become, instead of 26, it becomes 86 per month.
Correct, right around 2060 or so. And what you're looking at is the orange line jumps up a lot quicker because in 2025 to 2030, because that's when the bulk of the cost would be for paying for the expansion of wastewater plant 2. Right. Now there's another option, which is to demolish a facility, build one single facility that has a whole entirely different line. There's a lot of different options, a lot of different ways to look at it, but basically if you expand or you build new over the next 10 years, you'll see that cost increase and then go down at some point or kind of plateau off. If you renew the facilities with the dollars we're talking about, you're likely talking a bond. That's why you see that blue line slowly go up and then slowly go down out till 2090, because it's different bond sales over different periods of time.
Yeah. Now, the cost still is throwing me a bit, and I'm hoping we're still very initial in all of this thinking. Were you trying to go to a tertiary treated level? I don't see the chart right now on the BOD5 and the TSS and phosphorus, but were you shooting for, instead of advanced secondary, maybe a tertiary?
It's a very good point. This is Chris Meeks again, by the way. So the slide on page, I'm not sure, slide 12, the estimated consolidation process cost, as well as the other slides that you're seeing. Mm-hmm. Those are ranges. And so what we did is we didn't look at any technology, any certain treatment level. We just looked at basically baseline treatment and said to replace what we have, which is tertiary at 2 of the 3 facilities, but we did not look at phosphorus removal, nothing additional, no additional level of service beyond what is today, and said, what is the range to build a new facility? And it went from $8 to $13 or $10 to $15 per gallon. Now, what you're looking at on that same slide, estimated consolidation, the reason it's 100 to 500 million is if you expand wastewater plant 2, in 20 years, you're going to be looking to replace wastewater plant 2 that's existing today. So we've added that cost in there, which is, I think, about 200 million or so. And so there's a very large range.
And that is at what, $15 or $20 a gallon? Because
that's still at 10 to 15. It just has a 3% inflation per year.
I see. Okay.
But also to answer your question a little bit further, these numbers are extremely high level. This is the River Authority and the internal engineers taking a look at it and saying, from our standpoint, does this make sense and does this look feasible? The feasibility study will drill down a little bit further. They won't get down into the weeds of what technology, so on and so forth, but it'll cut down a little bit. It'll go from maybe 50,000 to 30,000 few to narrow down the numbers, to drill down a little bit further and say, is it financially feasible and is there potentially an appetite in the community to do this? If at the end of the feasibility study, the MUDs look at this and say, we do not want to go any further, we do not want to do consolidation, it's done, we continue with the current plan. If the MUDs say, yes, this is something that seems financially feasible, let's move forward with it, then we move into a master plan which drills down into the details of the who, what, when, where, why, gets some more defined, detailed cost involved, talks more to the community, gets to see what their needs, wants, desires are, and then goes forward from there. And one thing I failed to mention, to pay for this feasibility study, we're proposing to use the 2017 bond funds. There, at this point, after all construction is planned to be done, it looks like there's about $2 million of unallocated bond funds that can go towards this. And so this would not be anything in addition that would cause the rates to increase at all. This is money we have on hand.
Well, initially, this takes care of most of my questions. I want to study this a little bit more, and I appreciate those answers.
This is Director McIntosh. I think we all understand that when this all started, the developer bought the capacity, and the developer had funded San Jacinto River Authority to do increases. Initially, they had one plant that was owned by the developer, and that was then taken over by San Jacinto River Authority. But back, I think about the third interim accounting, the developer got out of the picture. He was supposed to get out of the picture and sold all of his existing capacity for those projects that he had forward. And all this was based on a 5-year plan that the developer had that was updated annually. And then we had at least some out period of time to look at all these things. But we haven't had a 5-year plan from the developer in I don't know when. And we're just jumping from ice floe to ice floe like little Eva in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I think we got to take our hats off to San Jacinto River Authority. They're presenting us a long-term plan that makes sense and needs a considerable amount of study at no cost to us at this time because it's already been funded. And I think we ought to think strongly about going forward with their suggestion.
Well, Chris, thanks for the excellent presentation. Not being an
if I
expert in the field, there's not much I can offer one way or the other, but Hartley, I appreciate your comments based on your many years of experience and observation. So,
But
and
also,
if I can add just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll add that the audit committee has recommended that this study go forward. We did have it on each MUD's agenda this month to be discussed and inform the MUD directors what's going on. But at some point, it will come back before the trustees for actual approval or consideration and action.
so we don't need to take any action at this time.
Not at this time. It's just there's a timing issue with the feasibility study. If it's approved at the March trustees meeting and it takes 12 months to get done, then basically next March of 2022, we can have a good idea how to develop our 10-year project plan. Because what occurs is, to let you know, with consolidation, there's a couple projects that we're holding back. So in other words, wastewater plant 1, there's $15 million of an aeration basin that I don't want to put into the ground until the MUD say, yes, we want consolidation, or no, we don't want consolidation. Because if you consolidate and I put the money in the ground, it's wasted money. So I'm holding on to those projects. So if the trustees vote in March for the consolidation, 12 months from then, I'll be able to shape the ongoing 10-year project plan. If it's not voted in March, if it's voted in April or May, then next year kind of creates a snowball effect of me delaying projects to not waste the money and put it in the ground. So just something to keep in the back of your mind.
So how does that affect the Tin Man project at wastewater treatment plant number 1?
The Tin Man was approved and kickoff was on Friday, so design's underway. If the Tin Man is constructed or if the MUDs approve for the Tin Man to be constructed, it's looking to be constructed in about January of next year. And so
how much is that costing?
That is right at $200,000. It's $197,000 and change.
Okay. So that's not a big deal then.
But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
So that would be, the Tin Man would be completed by, you say February of 2022?
The design will be completed by, I think it's October, November of 2022. I'm sorry, 21. Let's see, what year are we in? 21?
Yes.
So by the end of this year, the Tin Man will be complete and we'll be prepared to go out for construction if the trustees approve it. So it's only for design this year. Construction would begin next year.
Okay.
Now keep in mind, construction is estimated right now at $1.5 million and somewhere in the ballpark of 9 to 12 months, depending on availability of equipment.
Okay, so the study is 200,000, but the installation we're looking at 1.9 million.
1.5 million.
1.5.
Yes, sir.
And what is the estimated life of the Tin Man?
Until we actually complete the design, I'm not entirely sure what the design's going to tell, what equipment's going to have there. So until we actually do the design, I can't give a good information on that one, that question.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Any further questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to item number 14. Brian?
This is Brian. Not much under the attorney's report today. The legislative session is still off to a pretty slow start. And we're also looking at, I think we've talked about in prior meetings, the Con-10 form or policy. Jim and I are taking a look at that to potentially update it to reflect current provisions under the water code. So we may have a couple of changes to recommend on that in the coming months. But that's all I have to report under their attorney's report. We've already covered the easement for that one district project.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Moving on to item 15. Walt and I had a meeting with Jim, Mike, and Maureen to talk about information relative to consolidating MUD 1 and 6. And we're still awaiting some information, and we came to the conclusion that there's no rush to get it out there's just no deadline. We've got plenty of time to do this, so I'm hoping that we may be in a better position to give a final report and recommendation on March. If not, it will occur in April. And one of the concerns that Walt and I had is that MUD 6 may be faced with the purchase of additional capacity due to some future developments. And Walt is going to talk to Robert Heineman about getting some information on that. And I have no idea what that's going to mean, whether it's significant or not. Walt, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that concerns me is you have that shopping center over there in Grogan's Mill. And, we have the same thing in Panther Creek. We have these two shopping centers that are basically idle. And sooner or later, the developer is going to have to make a decision on what to do. Now, for the Grogan's Mill Shopping Center, they'd have to get the ILUD changed, which means because that's designated for basically a grocery type store there. But it's also very valuable property for them to put condos and everything with the lake being there. So, that's a concern there. And then we have the same thing in Panther Creek, although that's not designated. So the ILUD could be changed there pretty easily. So those are just some of the things that we're concerned about. I'm trying to get up with Robert Heineman and see if I can find out if they've got further information on where they're going with that. So we'll have to get back with you.
Any other board member have a comment or questions or things that Walt and I should consider? Okay. If not, we'll move on to item 16, which I'm really pleased to hear that we've got the funding for the phase 2 study. So Ron, do you want to elaborate a little more on that? Or Matt, I guess that's yours.
I don't think Matt's on, but Matt gave me the updated information. Yeah, the Water Development Board approved our application on January 28th, and the River Authority is working with the anticipated funding partners to finalize an interlocal agreement, which includes MUD 1. We're planning to take that interlocal agreement to our board no later than April, and anticipate taking the Water Development Board contract to our board this summer.
Ron, are we going to approach the township to see if they'll kick in some money?
I'm not aware of that. I'm just aware of the 5 MUDs participation. Oh, Jim?
No, we don't have any in plan to do that at this point. The interlocal agreement is actually the 5 MUDs, 4 of our MUDs, MUD 386. And then also we've got now the city of Humble, I believe, is wanting to participate in another entity in that region. Ron, who was the other?
I don't remember.
Maybe it is just Humble, but the township is not part of the interlocal that's being reviewed right now.
Wouldn't hurt to ask them though, would it? Just to see what they say.
We can bring that up at the next One Water Task Force.
Okay. Anything further on item 16? If not, we'll move on to 17. Jim?
A few items to highlight from the trustee meeting. Bob Lux has been serving as the Woodlands Water Agency representative to the Texas Water Conservation association for a couple of years. He's been nominated to continue to serve on that utility district panel. And I think we support him, his involvement of that. He's been very helpful in keeping us informed of what's going on in that organization. As Brian mentioned, we're still looking at the content agreement, and we'll be coming back with you at either April or May on March or April on that. I've been dealing with concerns from 2 neighborhoods on the AMI poles. In the pole that was constructed on the San Jacinto River Authority well site up near Kirkendall and Woodlands Parkway, some residents have a concern there with the how it might impact their property values. Also, some residents around the Slash Pine Water Plant #1. So I've been meeting with those residents and trying to look at what options may be available to address their concerns. Paul Martin indicated that his preliminary calculations that reveal that there may be a refund coming back to the MUDs next month when we evaluate our reserves. If you remember, we passed a resolution a while back. If the reserves exceed a certain threshold, then we refund those back to the MUDs in the same proportion as which we took them in. And that concludes my report, but I'm available for questions.
Any questions from the board?
I don't have any.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. Hartley, number 18.
The Woodlands trustee report is in your packet, and the general manager has highlighted most items of interest. Are there any questions? None. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Okay, item 19. Does anybody have something they want to place on the future agenda?
Hey, Bob.
No, but I would like to indicate that on page 44 of our audit report, the term of office for Hartley McIntosh is incorrectly listed. It's 5/20 to 5/24, and I would like that correction made at your earliest convenience.
Where is that, Hartley? In the trustee summary?
No,
On the audit report, page 44, they listed all of the directors to include Helen Bostic because she was part of it during that period. And they were okay, except they listed my term of office incorrectly. They listed me as 16 to 20. And of course, that means I'd be out of office right now. My term is 5/20 to 5/24.
Well, hardly, the only reason I did that and put it on page 44 because they wanted to check you out and see if you were reading the damn thing.
You're absolutely right.
Hey, Bob.
Okay.
Bob, I got a discussion either for now or for a future agenda, but I think most of us have either received our first shots or second shots, and the staff has already been kind of back at the building. I was hoping we could figure out a way to meet face to face if we have to use that space out front where the foyer is, which is big and roomy, and we could social distance if we needed to. But I would like to see us seriously consider getting back together as soon as March or no later than April. But at some point, we've got to kind of pull the trigger on this thing and get back together. I mean, Zoom meetings, as fun as they are, I think I'm getting a little tired of them. So what do you think? Any thoughts?
You're missing those donuts and good coffee, Jeff?
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea, Bob. Yeah.
Jim, what do you think? I certainly wouldn't mind getting back together. Today's a good day to stay home on Zoom. Do we want to think ahead to April?
Hey guys, I got to go. My heating guy's here to see if I can get my heat going. So you guys be safe.
Okay, well, thank you.
Hi.
I'm happy to look into some protocols that we might could set up and visit with the president and Bob Lilac to see what we can do.
Okay. Anything else on item 19? If not, we will adjourn the meeting at 9:40 a.m. Thanks, everybody, and stay warm. Supposedly, it's going to go above freezing today, which means that hopefully the snow will melt. So we'll
Thank you,
see you
Bob.
all next month.
Good meeting.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.